Hey, Brian.
Hey, Jen.
What are you listening to this week? Welcome to season 4 of What Are You Listening To? The weekly podcast created to foster community through music by sharing the stories behind the songs that soundtrack our lives. Some of the songs are old, some new, all good. I'm Jenn Tully, and this week I'm joined by writer and photographer Bryan C. Parker. Bryan is executive editor of Austin Monthly Magazine and editor in chief of Texas Music Magazine. His journey in writing about music began 2 decades ago when he self published a succession of blogs devoted to the local Austin music scene and the artists who passed through the city's hallowed venues and clubs. That work turned into a freelance career writing for regional outlets like Austin Monthly, Texas Monthly, and Texas Highways, and occasionally for national outlets like Rolling Stone and SF Gate. Bryan has also penned an installment in the 33 and a Third book series on 80s punk band Beat Happening. So, as you can hear from that bio, you are in qualified hands. This week, Bryan and I are going to get to know each other through 4 songs. 2 are his picks, and 2 are mine. We'll chat about Texas, song lyrics as poetry, and why we both have a special place in our hearts for Towns Van Sant. Which songs do you think we're going to discuss? Tune into our conversation to find out. And in case our song picks are new to you, we'll publish a playlist with the episode so you don't miss a beat. With that, let's get started. Bryan, what are you listening to this week?
Well, I have some oldies but goodies. I feel like is I'm listening to this week. You already mentioned Beat Happening in the at the top of the show here, so
Yes.
um, my the first thing I'm listening to is some Beat Happening. Our Secret by Beat Happening is a song I've been listening to and is kind of a an old standby in the rotation, I would say.
So tell me about this. I have to know, like, how did you get into this band from 1985? And they're kind of an obscure band. Like we're talking when we talk about the 80s, like we're talking about like my childhood, right? Like I grew up in this time frame and was as musically active then as I am now. And Beat Happening was not on my radar. How did you come across this band and grow to love them?
Sure. Well, I think that this was an era, not in the '80s, but when I was really discovering music and the most musically active in the late '90s and early aughts. This was a time when people were really trading music a lot online. Like this is,
Okay.
Napster and LimeWire and all of these sort of applications, and also a bunch of blogging sites like LiveJournal and Diaryland and all of these sites. So
Yeah.
this all fits together. I wrote a book about Beat Happening, and I feel like this all figures into it in a little bit. But every time I go to talk about it, it is a little bit of a puzzle to explain how it all works together. But I think the general idea is that there are these hyper regional communities of artists, of bands who all sort of, I guess, communicate across the country or across the world in various ways. Um, Beat Happening was one of the first iterations of this, really. I mean, this was the cassette revolution, when having a cassette tape and being able to record yourself completely changed not just the industry, but the way that people thought about disseminating their music. It
Yeah.
was taking back the means of production. You don't need a label, you don't need a studio, you don't need execs in suits, you don't need that stuff. You just need to have the passion to make music. And so I think that was very inspiring for me. But so fast forward a little bit, the way that fits together is I think the same thing was happening with Beat Happening. They were literally, mailing cassettes to Tucson, Arizona, mailing cassettes to Washington, D.C., mailing cassettes to Austin, Texas. I mean, this was, they were trading music in that way. So technology, kind of a new wave of technology comes every decade or whatever, but really the iterations aren't dissimilar. So I think what was happening for me in the late '90s, early aughts was the same kind of trading of music. So people were very excited. And on MySpace or on LiveJournal, it was just really common for people to put in their bios or their tags, or to blog and all the time about what they were listening to. And so what would happen is you would get shown a band. For me, it was the entry point was actually this band called the Microphones, which I almost brought to you today. But
Yes.
um, but yeah, so the microphones were on this label called K Records, just like the letter K.
Okay.
And what you would do, what I would do, I feel like other friends did this as well, is as soon as you found a band, you'd find out what label they were on, and then you would listen to like every artist on that label. So you go to K, you listen to everything on K, and then you find, Sub Pop Records, you listen to
Yep.
everything on Sub Pop, and then you find Hush Records, you listen to everything on Hush. That was like a shorter lived label out of Portland, I believe. But yeah, there were just all these labels. I mean, the same thing was true in like Washington D.C. with Discord Records in the '80s. So that was sort of just a way to find out about music, pre-algorithm. I guess
Yeah.
I'm dating myself. If you're listening to this podcast and you're of the podcast generation, this was a way of discovering music.
Well,
So
we've
that
already talked about how I was a kid in the 80s, so it's okay. You're safe here.
Cool. Well, that's how I landed with Beat Happening. Is
Wow.
they're K Records, so KLP number one, the first LP released on K Records, is Beat Happening's self-titled debut, which is what this song is from. And to orient people for Beat Happening, I used to try to explain it. I've given you I've given you the scenic route of Beat Happening, um,
Right?
but the short route is Nirvana, which is probably the biggest rock band since the Beatles.
Yes.
Redefined American music in many ways. So Kurt Cobain had one tattoo on his left forearm, which was this K logo for this record label, K Records, and he was from Aberdeen, Washington, very near Olympia, Washington, which is where Beat Happening's from. He was a huge Beat Happening fan, and really, if you think about some of the simplicity of Nirvana songs and the simplicity of the chords and the arrangements and the directness of the music and the simplicity of the lyrics, you can hear a lot of that in Beat Happening. And Beat Happening and a lot of the music happening in and around Olympia, Seattle was formative for Kurt Cobain. And this is sort of a pre-grunge movement. But go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it's just so funny. Like I was so fascinated digging into this and into Sub Pop. Like Sub Pop was obviously very prominent in my life for so many reasons. It launched the musical, genre and artists that literally soundtracked a good portion of my life and my formative years. So it was really fun to dig in and see that, Sub Pop founder Bruce Pavitt went to Evergreen State College, which is where Beat Happening was from. Like it really started to kind of come together. And then one of the most magical things that I learned that I'm sure you know, but that made me so happy. And it was funny because I feel like if I listened to only this song, I could have predicted for you that at some point Mark Lanigan would produce them. Like at some point, they would have an interaction with Mark Lanigan. It's just like similar sensibilities, it sounds like. And if listeners have heard me talk about Mark Lanigan before. Of course, he was from Screaming Trees originally, but went on to do solo things too. But just a super interesting, tortured, strange, deep kind of guy. And so it was like seeing all of that come together was a real like aha moment for me around this band. And I'm always trying to like figure out, it's like a fun game that I play the way some people do, like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Like I have to think of like how I'm going to describe, like if two songs had a baby or two bands had a baby, they'd sound like this. And this one was almost impossible. Like I really couldn't narrow it down to, I think the closest that I got, and I'm very interested to see your reaction around this. The closest I could get to trying to describe to somebody that had never heard, and I'm not necessarily talking about their entire catalog, because I did enjoy listening to them, and it's not all one note. I was worried that everything was going to kind of sound the same, and it doesn't at all. So when I'm talking about just this song, I'm like, it reminds me of if They Might Be Giants and Fugazi had a baby.
Well, I think that's pretty apt in a way. I mean, they might be giants, have written these sort of quirky, childlike almost at times, but
Yeah.
emotionally resonant songs, which I think all of those descriptors apply to Beat Happening. But then, Calvin John, this is not my reference. This is someone else's. I may have said it in my book, and if I did, I hope I said I borrowed it then. But he Calvin Johnson, the lead singer of Beat Happening, had
Yeah.
this sort of Forrest Gump esque identity in the American independent music underground. in the 80s. Like the scene in Forrest Gump where he's like everywhere. He's meeting the
Yeah.
president. Yeah. So
Yes.
I feel like that was Calvin Johnson. He like just happened to be in Washington D.C. the week there was this formative show happening with these Discord bands and Rites of Spring, and just like it's very interesting. I mean, he had this way of being everywhere. He was living for a short time in DC for like a summer, but it was like somehow he was everywhere, and he just became this sort of powerful figure in independent music in the mid and late 80s. But I think that's pretty apt. Beat Happening thinks of themselves as a punk band.
Hmm.
Um, and if you hear it, you might not that might not be the descriptor that leaps to mind. Um, they were really progenitors of a genre now that people would call twee, which is sort of this affectedly saccharine, kind of intentionally sweet, but also always flirting with like sex and just darker connotations. Like they have an album called Black Candy, which I think that's a pretty
Yeah.
good way of thinking about Beat Happening, is like dark but sweet. And so they're a challenging band for sure. Before we get into listening to it, the last thing I want to say about it, and we could talk more, but the thing I want to make sure I get in before we listen is that when they formed this band in 1983, they were all at the Evergreen State College, which you
Yeah.
mentioned, in Olympia, Washington. This is a college where there are no majors. You design your own sort of coursework. It's sort of as open minded as you can imagine a college being. Their mascot, by the way, is the gooey duck. And I'll let you look that up yourself and be shocked. But anyway, they decided to form this band. They were like, let's start a band. We want to express ourselves. Everyone's doing this cassette revolution. Let's start a band. This is cool. And they all three agreed. Brett and Calvin and Heather agreed on this, and they were like, let's do this. They're like, great, okay, cool. So we should probably borrow some instruments, because they didn't own instruments and they didn't know how to play their instruments. So one of the things I think is
Okay.
fascinating about Beat Happening is on this first album, you are literally listening to them learn how to play instruments. And a couple of the songs on that record are literally pushing record on a boombox and just recording in an open room. So, a lot of people ask me, why did you pick this album? Because by the end of Beat Happening's career, I think even sort of people that would be more critical of what you're going to hear, which is very rough. They would be like, this is the only good stuff they've ever done. We hate this stuff. This is not listenable. Why did you pick this? And to me, what was important about it is less the music and more that it was a blueprint for a way of thinking about it. We can do this ourselves. We can push record. We can learn an instrument. It is about expression. It's about community. It's about saying something that all is kind of independent of music, which is a weird way to think about something as like a music person, quote music person who's like about the music. So much of it was about the peripherals to me, and I thought that was really interesting.
Well, and nothing's more punk than what you just said, right? Like nothing's more punk than like the sense of community, the weird like we need to express ourselves above everything else no matter what it sounds like. Like I think I could fully get behind that. Like that is if that's how they think of themselves, like that's pretty freaking punk rock to me to be like, yeah, we believe in expression and community above all things. Like
Yep.
above being able to play our instruments, above having a following, like
Yeah.
we're gonna do it. I
Punk
love that.
punk is an ideology, not a musical
Yeah.
style. And I think that's, I already kind of thought that before I went into it, but early on when when I interviewed Brett Lunsford, who plays in Beat Happening, and they all kind of traded instruments, by the way. One will play drums on one song, one will play guitar on another. They kind of traded off, but Brett mostly played guitar in Beat Happening. And when I interviewed him, one of the first things he said was, punk music is folk music, which is another interesting extension when you start thinking about music of the people for the people. It's communally oriented. Um, but I don't know how soon you want to get on to the song, so you tell me, because I
Well,
can. Yeah.
the listeners are going to get to decide
Okay.
because the playlist will
They
be
have the
attached.
playlist.
So
We
yeah,
can.
you and
Okay.
I are going to go, and
Okay. Good. Cool.
we're likely going to split this episode into two parts. So I think we're going to do a full episode on your two songs and then a full
Okay.
episode on mine, because I could talk to you for hours about each one of these songs. So
Okay. Great.
we're going to like I'll keep us moving along here, but I
Okay.
think that this is super interesting, and I love the backstory. And I also too, I'm curious, like just in terms of genre switching a little bit, as you were saying, like it's interesting for an air quote music person to get into a band like this. I'm also wondering, like as a music person who does have so much knowledge and who loves music so much, did you prefer having like the long form content of writing a book versus like just a quick blurb? Or is there something like really satisfying about and kind of like punk rock about being able to like get in, say what you want to say, and get out? Like, is there a way for you to like, is it like asking you to pick your favorite child, like to say, do you prefer long form content versus short form, or like do you have a preference?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have like five different answers. It's like I feel like pick your answer here. Um, Let me say the first thing that came to mind as you were asking this is something about the book that's fascinating. Is this was really my first opportunity to write something that was published, which may sound
Okay.
strange, but I had done blogs, um, self-published blogs. I had written thousands of blog entries. I think there was a year where I wrote like 200,000 words. So I mean, I was generating a tremendous amount of words, but it was not edited. And the editorial process and really published work, this was my first go at it. I mean, that's not maybe the case for most people. Maybe you write for a small newspaper or a small magazine, and then eventually maybe one day you write a book. This kind of went in reverse for me.
Okay.
I picked it up recently and read a little bit of the beginning of it, and I was like, not bad. I think I wish I had it to do over in a way, because I've learned so much since then. It was like a crash course in many ways in getting it really ready for publication. Things that go on the internet in blog form are pretty raw,
Yeah.
and so I think that I that would have been nice to have a little more experience under my belt before I tried writing a book. I think that the funny thing is, so the way that process works for 33 and a third, and by the way, maybe more than any question I've been asked throughout my whole career since, is how did you do that, and can you tell us how to do that? I've even been on calls where they want me to kind of advise people who are pitching how to do it. Um, I think it works a variety of ways, but one of the ways it works is to just have a really good pitch, just to have a really good idea. And Beat Happening's self-titled album is easily the most obscure record in this 33 and a third series. And let me give a little context on that. 33 and a third is a series where each book is about one album. It's really under the umbrella of Bloomsbury's academic arm. So
Oh,
this is sort of like, they think about it like if you wrote a college thesis on an album, basically something like
got
that.
it.
So they've published, I think they're probably like 150 or more now. I think mine's like 108. It
Oh,
used to
wow.
be independently owned by this imprint called Continuum. It was a much smaller print, and Bloomsbury bought it right around the time that I got signed up to do the book. And Bloomsbury is a huge imprint. Bloomsbury is the publisher that publishes Harry Potter, so
Wow.
it's large, but this is the academic arm. And so it's not as funded. Like, I had an editor who was on staff at the time. I think at one point they went to some freelance editors. It's just been, you know, it's writing about very obscure music in a way. So there's not the same funding for Harry Potter. No surprise there. But so anyway, it was just a little bit of a crash course in writing this book. And that's one thing about the book that I think is important to say. And so in terms of long form, I can be a little wordy if that's not clear already. I I like that you planned already to split this into two episodes. You're like, well, I think we're gonna do a two for here. So,
We are.
um,
I knew it
yeah,
though before. I already booked you for two parts. I know you.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, I can talk. But I work at this magazine now, Austin Monthly, which is so you're in a box. There are a lot of times we do a page, and the page is like it's 400 words. That's it. That's
Yeah.
all you're gonna, and that's max. Sometimes if we do something smaller with a nicer piece of art on a page, it's 250 words or whatever. Like that's it. And so I've gotten, not when you talk to me on a podcast, but in print, in print, I've gotten a lot better at at toning it down and figuring out what do I want to say and what's this message look like. And I think that book could be a lot better. So to answer your question directly after the scenic route, is I think I like both, And I think that the
Yeah.
freedom that comes with being able to really express yourself, even with some fluffiness, and even repeat yourself some, and it's like those are the things that maybe are really important. Like there's a reason they crop up more than once, even if it's not very artful or deliberate. Those are the important things you're circling around. I think that can be really valuable, but I also think it can be really valuable to put together a super tight 500 word story. Like I did one about a Spoon when Spoon released their latest album that I thought was pretty incisive and tight, and just kind of a review of where the band was that was important. So I don't have a great answer for you. I think they're both valuable in their own ways.
Yeah. Well, and I enjoy your short form content, your editorial content, just because I like the way that you think. And so I really do think that the book has to be like so insightful because I like the way that you look at things. You pull things apart in a way that I as a music fan find really interesting, even if sometimes our genres don't line up, or age wise our musical tastes are different, whatever the case may be. I still love the way that you look at things, and I think that that is why I'm really excited too to get into this next artist, because we are both bringing a song from this artist. And this is the first time we've actually done that on the show, where we both are bringing songs from the same artist where we're not featuring specifically that artist. But I just felt like, of all the people in the world that I could talk to about this musician, and especially the song that I'm bringing, and the song that you're bringing, you were just the perfect person. And I've sat for a long time and thought, what are the two songs, if I could sit down with Bryan, like what are the two that I would pick? And so I'm really excited for you to share your second pick, which is, if you can tell the listeners the title and artist, we are going to jump right into this one.
Great. Yeah. So the second song is If I Needed You by Townes Van Zandt.
Oh,
Um, and it's a meaningful song to me. My son's name is Towns, so
yes.
which was kind of a hard decision in some ways, because it's Towns Van Zandt did not have a happy life, but it was a combination of loving the artist and loving the name itself as well. There's a little bit of just the phonetics of liking the name, and liking something that was a little less common, for a name, but simple, not
Yeah.
outlandish. Um, so it's an important artist. It's an important song for sure. And I think that, a couple of just biographical background on this song for why this specific song has become so important. Um, Amid an artist whose life was very tragic, this is, I think, a particularly happy song, a beautiful song, an uplifting song. Um, when Holly was pregnant. My wife, my partner, was pregnant, and we had pretty much decided on the name. But Towns was not born yet, so there's always room to change your mind.
Yes.
But we were at a friend's wedding, and Holly was very pregnant at the time, and so there was a live band playing mostly covers, but violin, fiddle, and guitar and drums. It was like a country band doing kind of old country standards. Um, and Holly had very bad heartburn, as is common for being
As you
very pregnant.
do.
Yeah, exactly. And so she said, "Can you go to the car to get some Tums for me?" I said, "Sure." And so I was walking this trek. We were like in the hill country at a wedding, and so I was trekking to the car to get these Tums. And I got the Tums. I started to walk back, and as I was walking back, I could hear from a distance "If I Needed You" starting
Oh.
to play. And this song was really important to us, and so I started to run back toward the
Oh.
reception, to meet Holly, because I knew that this song was important to us. And Holly was standing on the porch of the like venue there, like waiting to meet me, and just like sobbing already, and knew that she was expecting me to be coming back. I'm tearing up too. You're tearing up.
Oh.
But she was expecting me to be coming back, and so then I grabbed her, and we two stepped and listened to this song. And then when we made the announcement that she was pregnant, this was like an Easter egg in the song, where it we knew we were pretty sure we were going to name towns. And so when we put a little video out like saying that she was pregnant, like the soundtrack for it was this song, and it was supposed to be like an Easter egg that his name was going to be Towns, even though we hadn't told anyone the name yet. So there's a lot
I
going on.
love this story though so much. I love it so much. I didn't think I could love this song anymore, and now this story has like elevated it again. Like I I've loved this song since I was a kid, but I have to be honest and say that it was the Emmylou Harris Don Williams version that I first heard in the 80s. I'm a huge Don Williams fan. I almost actually brought a Don Williams song. Because I love him. And this song is from his Lord, I Hope This Day Is Good album that I have listened to. That I've had to buy the album like multiple times because I've listened to it so much. Like throughout the years, I've worn out several copies of it. Um, and so it wasn't until college that I realized, so many of those old country standards that I loved were either by artists who cited Towns Van Sant as a major influence, or they were legit covers of his songs, like this one or like Poncho and
Much like,
Lefty,
yeah.
which was another huge song that it was actually, that's the Willie Nelson Merle Haggard version of that song, is the first song I learned all the words to. Like
And what
sat down,
one of
listened over and over until I knew every single word.
one of the greatest songs in any genre, certainly country music, but
Ever.
really in any genre ever written. Yeah, absolutely phenomenal.
Ever. And then again, so many of the artists that were so prominent during that time for me, like Steve Earle, like Willie Nelson, like Rodney Crowell, like these are the artists that ruled the country charts in the 80s, and they all have cited, Towns Van Sant as a major influence. And then later, still artists that you wouldn't expect, like Nora Jones or the Cowboy Junkies, state him as an influence. And then, of course, like the Lyle Lovetts, the Natalie Maines, the Jason Isbells, the Billy
Yeah.
Strings, the Charlie Crockett's. I mean, we could go back and forth all day about people that have considered him an influence. And so it just like, I think that I wouldn't have the love for that genre and that time period and that kind of country music without him. Like his influence is so vast and so major.
It's such a different approach and vibe for what most people think of when they think of country. And it's still, I think when you listen on its face, there are still going to be people, listeners who just don't want to do it, aren't up for it. But I think that yeah, the songcraft and the storytelling is just on another level. And it's so distilled, it's really simplistic. I mean, it's most of his stuff was not produced with a full band at all. There's some cuts that have like fiddle on it, but I mean, it's just very raw. Some of his best recordings and audience favorite recordings are live shows, like Live at the Old Quarter,
Mhm.
recorded in Houston. Is just a fantastic album. And yeah, I mean, for me, a transformative artist, one that really redefines what the genre is and what it's about, for sure. So yeah.
And you'll see, I mean, listeners, even if they've only listened to one episode of this show, know that I'm a big lyrics gal. And I just think that he is like some of the most magical words ever. I have to call out again, this is an artist where you could call out every single line, but this one in particular, even as a kid, I can remember thinking like that's the sweetest thing anyone's ever said to another person. And it's the line that says, in the night forlorn, oh, the morning's born, and the morning shines with lights of love. And you will miss sunrise if you close your eyes. That would break my heart in two.
Yeah.
Like I can barely read it without getting emotional. I think it's
It
like
sounds like Keats or something. I mean, it's like
it's
it's
yes.
romantic poetry. Yeah. I mean,
It's some of the sweetest words ever written. Like to my ears, those are some of the sweetest words I've ever heard.
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, words on another level, and it's interesting. I mean, so many Austin. I just to give a very current tie. I just did this interview with Calder Allen, who is Terry Allen's
Yeah.
grandson, and he is very close buddies with JT Van Zant, who does
Mm.
not have a musical career, but he is a fly fisherman, and Calder loves fly fishing, and the two of them will go fly fishing. But we talked a little bit about how much Austin has been a seat of this kind of standing outside the box, like it being all about the lyrics. And I mean, that is when you're talking about a songwriter, it's a songwriter. This is
Yeah.
something a lot of people don't think about as much, about the difference between a musician or a songwriter. But there's a reason that people like Townes Van Zandt had their songs recorded, or Guy Clark, who wrote songs
Hmm.
that were re-recorded, or Blaze Foley, these guys
Yep.
who had a vision for the song craft, not just being a musician, but the words, the song itself. And I think that when you're talking about that craft, Townes Van Zandt is among the best ever.
For sure. I mean, without a doubt. It's just, I think that he's on just another level when
Yeah.
it comes to putting words on paper that sound beautiful. It's just, it's insane. I have to interject another question here while we're on the subject though too. Like knowing that like writing about music is your business and you are involved in it so much professionally and personally. You're a music fan just in general, aside from like what you do for a living. Was it hard to come up with just 2 songs for the show, or were you, like, immediately like, "Nope, these are the 2 that rise to the top every time, it's gonna be these 2?"
I mean, impossible. It was impossible. I just did it. I just did it because I had to get on this call, and we had to have this have this recording session. But it's impossible. I mean, like I said, these are kind of deep cuts that are always in the rotation or whatever. But they're very biographical, which is I think why they landed here for us to discuss. And we've known each other for a little while, and they were good for
Yeah,
conversation. But yeah, it's impossible. I mean, I could do two more from what I'm listening to the last hour before I got on this call. I could do
same.
two from the last year. I mean, it's an impossible task. And really, I think there was a short list of about like 4 or 5 that could have been these songs. But I think these kind of define from career perspective and a personal perspective the things that were really formative, definitive for me. So that's how I landed here. But it's an impossible task. Actually, just by coincidence, right before this, I was sending a DM to a friend on Twitter about they had a tweet about Spoon recently, and so we were kind of
Yes.
just conversing about Spoon, and I was they had asked if a certain song was a top 10 Spoon song, or the best Spoon song, maybe the best Spoon song, and I was like, I don't think it's a top 10 cut. I think every song on Give Me Fiction is better than this song, and here's my top 10 list, and we were talking about it, but yeah, I mean, it just gets impossible. Yeah, everything is so contextual, mood dependent. But and that's why I think these are great, because they're more storytelling. Not
Yeah.
to leave the Townes Van Zandt conversation, but well, I guess storytelling is important to Townes Van Zandt. But to reference back to the beat happening a little bit, I mean, one of my favorite reviews of my book that was negative was like, this book isn't about music. Basically, it was like a 2 or 3 star review, like a mid review, and it was like, this book isn't about music. And I was like, correct. Just like beat happening is not really about music. Like you you can't really review, like, what am I going to do, review these like janky 3 chords that they were bad at playing? Like, it's not good, like
Yeah.
it
It's
was
not what it's
it's
about.
not what it's about. It's rough. What it was is like a cross section of culture in
Yeah.
1985. That's what it was about. So but yeah, these were about storytelling for me, I think, and kind of a narrative of my life, I guess.
I love that. I love that, and I think it's a great will that'll be a great place to leave it for this, and then we'll pick back up next week, and we're gonna start right where we left off with Towns Van Sant. But you also reminded me, and I always say this live because then the listeners too will like hassle me and I'll hassle you. We should I should have you back at some point, and we need to do a Spoon episode, like an all Spoon all the time. It's hard to just pick 4 Spoon tracks. Like those are when it gets really hard, when we're doing a specific artist show and you have to pick like only 4 songs from a band that's got like such a vast catalog,
Well,
but
I made
it'll
my
be
list
really
today,
fun.
so hope maybe I can just go back to my list, and I'll pull from
See,
that.
it'd
I
be
have
super
some
fun to
good
do a
Spoon
Spoon
stories.
episode.
I
Yes.
am here for a Spoon episode anytime. Your listeners are going to get tired of me, but I'm back. I'm back anytime.
Yes, I love, love, love. So we'll leave it here with your 2 picks and then we'll pick up next week with
Well, let
mine.
me say
So,
thank you for having me, even though this is going to be a continued episode.
yes.
Thank you for having me this week and next week.
Exactly. I couldn't just limit your knowledge to one episode. So Thank you, listeners. We'll be back next week and we're going to pick up with my two picks with Brian Parker.